Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. So today I have Shahar with me on this podcast. Shahar is the CEO and co-founder of Groundcover. I am extremely honored to have Shahar on the show today. From his experience, let's learn about observability, APM, eBPF, and most importantly, ground cover and how ground cover is helping organizations build robust observability solutions. So thank you, Shahar, for being on the channel today. Would you like to introduce about yourself and the journey of founding ground cover?
Yeah, so first of all, Abhishek, thank you for having me on your podcast. Great to be here. So basically, Groundcover was, founded about 3 years ago. My experience and my co-founder's experience is very similar in the fact that we kind of grew up in, different fields of R&D from um, machine learning to a lot of years in cybersecurity. Basically, on the user end of solutions like Datadog, New Relic, Dynatrace, Prometheus, Grafana, kind of getting familiar with these stacks and using them for our purposes, as um, you know, team leaders, R&D managers, these sorts of positions over time. And basically, Groundcover was kind of founded from that, from pains that we experienced over the years of things, working better or worse with some of these solutions. And the idea came to life about 3 years ago, and that's what Groundcover is today.
Awesome. So, Shahar, I keep saying this that observability is the most underrated thing. And there is a reason why I say that because I've seen a lot of companies in the cloud native space, they end up wasting millions of dollars. And the reason is quite simple. The application is down during the critical times, or they're not able to meet the SLAs for their customers. And I believe this can be solved by having observability in place. Why do you think, personally, a lot of companies don't have a proper observability in place? Is it because of the complexness that is involved, or is it because of the lack of awareness?
Well, I think that observability is a profession, right? So when we think about R&D and development or ops in R&D, then it feels like over time we've taught developers and DevOps people that they should take care of the entire stack they're responsible of, security, observability, networking, all bunch of stuff that are basically on your plate as a DevOps or an R&D person inside a big organization.
Yeah.
I think that over time, as the system get more and more complex, it's clear that observability is a profession, right? So we're teaching organizations to just use Prometheus, Grafana, or any of these solutions which are available to them. But how do you choose your cardinality wisely? How do you query the data wisely to not overload your dashboards and make them snappy and usable, basically? How do
Hmm.
you choose how to aggregate data and cross-section it and correlate it with other pieces of data like logs and traces or whatever? How to manage them from an observability perspective, not just an ops perspective, how to really use these solutions to gain value. And on the other end, the SaaS solutions we're used to consuming, like Datadog, Relic, Dynatrace, Splunk, whatever, are just becoming more and more expensive over time. And
Hmm.
organizations are kind of turn between those two pieces, and sometimes choose the harder path of implementing them themselves without the skills necessary, just because they just can't do it otherwise from a cost perspective, and therefore, we lose a lot of people on that journey because they're turning in a corner they don't know how to take. Which I think that's what happens right now in the market.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because sometimes companies don't invest a lot on the ops or on the observability, and they end up wasting a lot of their resources as well as money. Going back, you were talking about a interesting point that you were talking about New Relic, you were talking about Datadog. So personally, what problem are you solving with ground cover that you feel that New Relic or Datadog these observability platforms are missing?
So I think that the idea behind what Datadog and New Relic represents is definitely correct, right? It's not new. Three pillars of observability, tracing, metric, logs. You might throw on profiling in there, whatever you believe in, right? But basically, these things are definitely cornerstones of how to work with observability. SRE, DevOps, infra teams know these terms, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is very concrete and founded and definitely okay. I think that over time, what happens is this solution started with something that made sense from a two perspectives, 10 years or 15 years ago. One,
Mm.
environments were much more homogeneous, right? You were using, VMs with Java running on top of them or whatever, which
Yeah.
was, it wasn't very heterogeneous. There wasn't too much democracy in choosing the programming languages or the stack, right? It was pretty much the
Mm.
same in your environment. That's one. And then, instrumentation or agents, work much better at these specific languages, basically allowing you to gain observability in a kind of one-click experience like Dynatrace provided, let's say 15 years ago. And
Mm.
on the other hand, data volumes weren't immense, right? You didn't have microservices-based architecture, which is basically heavily API driven, right? So when
Mm.
you were monitoring tracing, it will basically be a monolith, doing a few operations inside, and not like 20, 30 different operations for any user interface in your applications, because you're using the cache service and the payment service and the DB or whatever. So as time passes, basically we're seeing this solution get more complex. They're divided into tiers. You need to pay for log management and infrastructure monitoring,
Mm.
and they are operated with a collector or an agent. And then you want tracing, so you need an SDK because you have 15 different languages in your organization, and each one of them requires different treatment, right?
Yeah.
And then you do all that, and the vendor charges you per data volume because this is how the market was grown. And it's too expensive, right? So you start to cut down on cost and say, you know what, let's not monitor dev. It's too much, right? Or let's heavily sample the traces. Let's keep 0.5%. Or
Mm.
let's limit the kernelity of the infrastructure metrics because we just can't monitor per container CPU or whatever, right? So
Mm.
that's what happens, and eventually, solutions being right, like Datadog and New Relic, eventually turn to be unusable from a cost and from an onboarding perspective, just too complex on both. And I think that's exactly what Groundcover touches on. We use eBPF, which we can talk about, which basically allows us to onboard the solution into the organization in a minute, like that 15 years ago experience of onboarding into Java. And also, we don't price by data volume, which kind of brings back these solutions to where they need to be, a much more
Oh,
sane and relaxed solution, where you
okay.
don't have to worry about next bill coming next month. So I think that's exactly what Groundcover touches on. Yeah, and I think that's the pace of the market today, at least.
Got it. So again, the two interesting things, uh, like the buzzing things. One is cost optimization, for sure, and the other thing is eBPF. So, do you think eBPF is the selling point of ground cover? Because eBPF is like a very how do I put that? Like eBPF is the one that can get a lot of information from your systems because it directly talks to the kernel. It gets a lot of information from the nodes from your network. So, do you think eBPF is the core piece of your architecture, or anything beyond eBPF as well?
So I think Groundcover stands on like two major pillars. One is that we believe that observability should be frictionless, right? You should onboard into your observability stack as quick as possible and as uniform as possible, because the people responsible for waking up at night, the DevOps, the SRE, the infrastructure teams, don't necessarily have the control over the R&D to
Hmm.
make sure that next sprint all the 13 different teams running Scala and Java and Python and Go will do the work and make sure that the work is uniform. And therefore, we've kind of put the responsibility on them, but then made them basically kind of powerless, right? They want to monitor the SLOs, but they can't instrument the code. So Groundcover is using eBPF for that, and I
Hmm.
think that's one selling point. The solution is installed in 2 minutes. Bam, traces, metrics, logs, and basically one person inside the organization, that person you want responsible, that SRE guy, right, can do the installation and monitor the entire organization, and then go back to the R&D and say your services are now monitored, and not the other way around. So that's one thing, but the thing is that eBPF is such a powerful technology that it allows you to monitor a lot of intimate data that you couldn't access before. For example, traces of
Hmm.
applications you didn't even instrument, right? That legacy code no one wants to touch, right? So suddenly it's a kind of a premium access into data that you didn't have before. So if you think about it, and when we started Groundcover 3 years ago, Datadog didn't have back then, for example, its eBPF offering. It
Hmm.
was clear to us that once they get there, they're a very sophisticated and well-founded engineering company, clearly, and we have a lot of respect for them. We knew that when they get there, they're going to charge premium for that, right? You're
Hmm.
going to pay for logs, metrics, traces, APM plus eBPF data
eBPF.
because
Yeah.
they're used to charging on data volume. So if you give them a more powerful hose like eBPF, they're just going to charge you more. So that's the other pillar Groundcover is built on top, which I think it's even more important than eBPF. And it's
Hmm.
saying, regardless where we collect the data, right? Open telemetry, eBPF, whatever the data is coming from, if we don't make it sensible on the other side of how we price it,
Hmm.
how we store it, then what does it matter? You're not going to use it. You're not going to send it over to Groundcover. You're going to make the same bad choices like you do with the other vendors. So Groundcover is built on the second pillar, which is very unique, and it's called Incloud. Basically, that's our entire architecture is
Yeah.
separating the data plane and the control plane. And I think no other vendors in the market do that today. Basically, what it means is that the experience is SaaS. You go into groundcover.com, see the dashboard like you used to, but the actual data plane, the logs, the metrics, the traces that we collect are stored on your cloud premises.
Hmm.
Now, that's so unique that people don't really understand what it means until they kind of, hear about it for the first time and talk about it deeply. Once you get the concept of us being able to basically manage the backend of Groundcover just only on your premises, kind of a single tenant approach distributed on our customers, then we're suddenly, move to your side. There is no need anymore to price on data volume because we don't store it for you.
Hmm.
So, we're no longer on the, kind of the evil side of, oops, you pushed in 30 more percent of logs. So let's charge you for it. We can help you, stream whatever you want, retain whatever you want, but, we don't have any incentive to charge you on this data. And therefore,
Hmm.
Groundcover doesn't charge on data volumes, and it releases all these trade-offs. And regardless of eBPF being so powerful, it's a different approach between the customer and the vendor relationship. We're on your side. We're not going to surprise you with any data volume charging, and therefore you can make wise decisions about what you want to monitor and what not. And in most cases, just monitor a whole lot more than what you're monitoring today. Combined with eBPF, it's a very powerful approach, right? A lot of data
Yeah.
plus you don't have to be charged for it the same.
Also, I think the security aspect comes into picture because you are allowing people to have the solution on their on premises. So which is again like a lot of security that you are adding.
True. I think that there's a motion in the market that we all feel right about privacy, at least.
Yeah.
Companies eventually, imagine a fintech company, their logs, their traces basically
Hmm.
include very sensitive information about
Yeah.
their customers.
Yeah.
They're kind of, stuck in that loop of sending it over to a SaaS provider like Dynatrace, New Relic, or Datadog, and in a sense, they can't break out of it. So even if you promise them, the security measures on the third party, no one is really happy about it, right?
Hmm.
So I think Incloud makes security teams very happy, and it's very GDPR compliant and privacy compliant in a sense that the data it stays on the customer premises. Groundcover doesn't really have access to the data, but
Hmm.
even more, it can be stored at ref at the region it's being collected. We don't have to truck it to another region like where Groundcover actually stores the SaaS solution. Therefore, it's super fit for privacy aware companies. And to throw another kind of turn on that, we also support on-prem. It's a very we think of on-prem as something that fits governmental agencies and stuff like that. But ad tech, fintech, HR tech, whatever companies are very concerned about sending even the slightest data into Groundcover. So we
Yes.
also once we separate the data plane, it's easy to move to full on-prem, which is an underserved kind of part of the market. And I think as a young company, it's interesting to offer that, right?
Yeah.
we can also support full on-prem. So that's another advantage of Incloud.
Yeah, I think that that brings in a lot of also a trust for all that financial domain to just onboard Groundcover. I also like the simplicity of the platform. You just go to Groundcover and you really know what what is it offering, and how you can. It's just like plug and play, right? You just have to just go with the default Incloud option, and you have the eBPF, which is getting a lot of data already. Even if you don't have that metrics, or you don't have any of the monitoring in place, you can still get a lot of information.
True. I think from the get-go we were very focused on being self-serve. Clearly when you sell observability to big organizations, it's a heavy solution to sell, right? Migration between different observability solution isn't easy and requires a lot of trust. But we
Yeah.
also need to be self-served so people can try it out. As you
Mm.
mentioned, we have a playground as well where people can
Yeah.
kind of play with the system. We have a free tier, which is also very unique. Not a trial, right? 2 weeks and it's done. It's an actually free tier for life. You can install it on one Kubernetes cluster, no matter the size, and just kind of experience Groundcover fully featured. Because we believe that people kind of need to see how eBPF and Inclouds work. Once you see that, once you get, oh, I can actually be priced like that, and data just flows in, then you can make the decision to move. And the DNA of the company is very, very around that. The product is, at the front. Want people to try it out, comment. We have a community Slack. People ask all kind of questions and tell us where we're wrong. And that's how we operate for the last 3 years.
As a content creator, I just play with a lot of tools that are in the market, because I'm always looking for, okay, what should I do the next video? And when I came across Groundcover, I just thought, okay, let me try the free tier, get it on one of my Kubernetes clusters. And that's when I was surprised, because I don't have anything on the cluster. I just installed Groundcover, and the default eBPF was doing pretty much for me. I get a lot of information of my Kubernetes cluster already. So yeah, great job there. Because we are talking about
Thank you.
because we are talking about playground, can you give little more insight on what is the idea behind having that playground? Because it's a very cool feature, and are you going to continue that, having the playground in the ground cover?
Yeah, so I think that at the beginning one of the first things that we released is the ability to install Groundcover self-serve. Click a few clicks, don't talk to a human, right? You're a DevOps or an RD person, you don't want to talk to a human, so just click a few clicks and install Groundcover. But over time, we found out that even though we're so open and easily installed, right? Because it's an eBPF sensor, it's like plug and play. Then most people are still kind of hesitant at that point, not because they're hesitant about Groundcover, but because maybe they're from a bigger organization and they don't have the authority or access to even install us on their Kubernetes cluster. Or maybe they don't have an interesting enough Kubernetes cluster with a
Mm,
relative demo to test on, right, before their real staging or production environment. And we felt like it's kind of a
mm,
miss to install Groundcover or in a very quiet environment where the APM features can shine, or not install at all because you just can't.
got it.
And Playground is basically kind of trying to bridge that gap of saying, it's so simple that if you want to install it, you can, but if you don't, play around with our demo and see what's going on. I have to tell you from my experience over the years that once people see Groundcover working on their data, it's much more powerful, than a playground demo. But it's still important to get a hang of what you kind of set expectations of what will happen once you
Mm,
install. If we request people even for the shortest effort, right, to read our docs for a bit and install Groundcover, it's kind of a transition of faith between both sides of saying, thank you for your trust. Hear it how it's going to look, right? So you're not surprised or disappointed. And I think it works great because once people get excited about the playground, then installation also becomes more interesting. It may be the incentive to talk to your manager and ask for requests to install on staging, or kind of do the extra mile for before you install Groundcover. And yeah, we're gonna definitely maintain it, and Playground is up to date with our latest features all the time that we announce over Slack and in our website. So any
Wow.
new features that's just rolled out automatically to Playground, so it's always up to date. So you can definitely play with it as we improve stuff.
That's very easy, right? Because, when you are a DevOps engineer and you find a new tool, you always have to get your cluster, you have to install that platform. So you have a dev cluster, and then you have that tool installed on that dev cluster. And when you actually go to production environment, it looks quite different. But what you have
Sure.
done with the playground is a comprehensive environment where you have open telemetry in place, you have all the workloads that can give you a feel of working on a production grade Kubernetes cluster. So
Exactly.
brilliant there. And one question is because different organizations at this point of time might have different monitoring solutions. Some organizations might be with Prometheus, which is a open source one, or they might have some commercial monitoring and observability solutions. How easy is it to switch from those platforms to Groundcover? I've seen you already have support for a lot of data sources, but would like to hear from you.
Yeah. So I mean, eventually we went heavily into trusting eBPF, right? So eBPF
Mm,
is not your Prometheus open telemetry stack, right? It's proprietary. We have our own sensor that does that, but we made all the decisions possible to make the ground cover stack transparent and easily clickable with open source. Even
mm,
though the agent is not open source or the sensor is not open source, we made all the decisions to support that. So, for example, we use Victoria Metrics running in your Incloud exposed to you, and also is Prometheus compatible. That's a Prometheus compatible metric source, so you can query using PromQL and let us
mm,
scrape your custom metrics, which are Prometheus annotated or whatever, right? Very kind of fit to that. And we also use an open telemetry ingestion pipeline to store the data coming out of the eBPF sensor. So even though it's coming from eBPF, we process it and store it as an open telemetry protocol schema in our databases. So you're not vendor locked in any way on one end, and on the other end, you can definitely integrate anything you want. So if you already made the hard work, right, of instrumenting open telemetry, we're gonna give you eBPF, which brings a ton of value, but then not lose any data, right? We want to keep
mm.
your hard work, so we're gonna just streaming open telemetry traces into Groundcover as well. So that's kind of our approach. So, open telemetry, Prometheus, any log collectors, cloud integrations are definitely supported in Groundcover on top of eBPF. And we also are very proud of the architecture. We're not hiding it. It's not like, what database is Datadog using, right? You don't know or should know. We're very proud of, using ClickHouse and Victoria Metrics. We believe they're best of breed. You can actually access them directly or not care about them at all if you don't want to get into the bits of, the bolts and bits of Incloud. Depends on you, but
Hmm.
everything is very transparent and easily pluggable, so you can make a decision like how you want to work.
Great. And one interesting question that I have is when it comes to monitoring observability, usually companies have this mindset of doing this at the end. Companies have this mindset that let's go to production first, let's do the monitoring later, or let's get the SLAs out later. So personally, as a founder, do you find it hard to convince people to have the monitoring solutions and have your when you go talk about ground cover, do you find it difficult to convince people that monitoring is the first thing that you need to have, or at least do from the point you start building your application?
So I think that a good observability product does two things. One, knows how to sit on that trigger point when you're ready to think about another solution, right? Because you're busy all the time, right? People are very busy, specifically in the ops domain. So
Yeah.
it's not like you have a free time to observe, kind of go through a million different solutions and figure out what's best. So you we do our best to sit on that trigger point. For example, Groundcover is very fit to kind of born to monitor Kubernetes. So organizations migrating to Kubernetes might not want to change their Dynatrace or New Relic stack right now, but it's a trigger point, right? You start thinking about it. I just switched stacks. Maybe it's a good time to think about a new solution. So we're definitely sitting on a few trigger points, including cost reduction and Kubernetes monitoring and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And the other bit is, since we're so easy to install, then we find it easier to convince people to invest the small amount of time they need to move into Groundcover. And I think we saw a lot of solutions in the market. I think OpenTelemetry being an open source is the most interesting one.
Hmm.
It kind of, it solves the right problem. It's a good idea, but organizations are not adopting it almost at all, right? I mean, we
Hmm.
rarely encounter an organization that has like fully adopted OpenTelemetry, and it definitely sits on the exact same trigger points of maybe I want to get out of data because the cost is too high, so let's switch to OpenTelemetry. But the switching cost is so high, unlike
Hmm.
Groundcover. It's kind of a year, 2 years of movement inside the organization, convincing the R&D to start instrumenting code, building the stack to
Exactly.
support it on the back end, and so on. That it doesn't matter. It doesn't happen eventually. So we're definitely, I definitely think that people aren't easily migrating between observability solutions, and therefore Groundcover is very mindful on exactly that, finding the right trigger point, but also making it easy for you, because assuming that you will invest 6 months in migrating from Datadog to Groundcover, even if it's awesome, is the wrong idea. People don't have the time for that, and they will work and in subpar environments for a while
Hmm.
just to not make the switch, just to not kind of take the risk of the switch. So I think since we're so easy to deploy, it definitely helps them to just POC it for a second and then fall in love with the solution, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, totally agree. And looking at the platform itself, like when I started exploring ground cover and you know, with my knowledge on observability, I always recommend, whether it's a consulting work or when I'm talking to people, I always say that you need to have a strong observability, because it can help you reduce the cost in multiple levels, not just like I'm not talking about a simple cost reduction, but if you get the metrics, if you understand your system better, you can reduce the cost at multiple levels. Uh, do you have any stories of customers getting on board with ground cover and saving the cloud cost?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the most expensive things is basically troubleshooting time, right? You
Hmm.
can think of cloud costs directly, which we also kind of focus on, but you can also think about troubleshooting time. And I think that once ground cover kind of breaks the trade-off between what am I monitoring and what am I paying for and so on, a lot of interesting things happen. One of the coolest examples is that Groundcover made a decision to actually store the payload of traces that we capture in the platform. This is not supported by Datadog, New Relic, OpenTelemetry. You just see
Mm-hmm.
kind of a span, the latency of that span, and good luck figuring out what went down there. And that, for example, we see with a lot of companies is a feature that people are very surprised about, because again, we can do that because we don't price on data volume, and we also capture the data smartly at the sensor side, and we kind
Hmm.
of control the volume and also store it on your premises in a cost-effective way. So people suddenly open the platform, and one of the first things they see, if you've noticed, we have something we call the issues tab,
Hmm.
and that's kind of problems detected by Groundcover. Now, every environment that we get installed on, that page is populated with something, right? And then you see people intuitively kind of clicking and then clicking again, and then seeing the payload of a failed request or a failed DB query. And suddenly, when they actually stare at the payload itself with all the context we provide, something clicks and they can solve the problem, which might be something they haven't addressed in a while, right?
Hmm.
Because it's hard to debug, it's not clear, it happens rarely, you don't have the exact context of what went down and why this query is so long or whatever.
Yeah.
So this is one of the cool trade-offs that we see today. Yeah.
I think especially at the network layer, when you have a latency, and if the latency is coming from your network layer, I think it's very difficult to figure out what is happening
Yeah,
there. And I think that's where your eBPF thing comes into picture.
exactly. eBPF is really strong in tying things between infrastructure and application. For example, one of the interesting features that Groundcover also gave a lecture in KubeCon on recently is actually our ability to monitor network streams that cross availability zones in cloud. right?
Oh.
Pe People, are taught to work in high availability, right? Which makes sense, but they have no idea about the implications, also cost and performance, and it's super hard to monitor because it has nothing to do with your application.
Hmm.
In an APM perspective, application A talking to application B, you have that trace, everything is good. But on the underlying infrastructure, that connection sometimes crosses two AZs, and you pay three times the performance of the latency and the cost for that. So eBPF is really good at tying the knots between those different stuff and saying, this application thing is also related to this infrastructure thing because it's basically running on the operating system, right? And unlike in the container itself. So networking specifically, like this example, is definitely a cool feature that eBPF can help, give the application context to. Because just monitoring network is also uninteresting, right?
Yeah,
Just saying, throughput between different ports and whatever. So putting that together is a unique ability, I'd say, of eBPF, which we use heavily in Groundcover.
got it. And talking about the security point, because a lot of subscribers who are watching this podcast, I'm sure coming from site reliability background, DevOps background, these days, DevSecOps being the buzzword. Uh, can you also explain little more on what security measures, apart from the Incloud feature, you have taken in the ground cover? Because you personally come from a security background.
Yeah. So Groundcover is very security aware from the ground up. So we do a few things. One of them is, the Incloud itself. So Incloud is built in a way which, again, once Incloud is running on your end, it doesn't require even an ingress. It's not like Groundcover is approaching the Incloud cluster from remote. We actually have kind of a reverse approach where Incloud opens the connection to Groundcover, the Groundcover control plane. So it's very secure in the sense that you don't even have to open access to your actual, servers. Second, we never have access to the data itself or the application clusters when you install the sensor. So basically, you only have, like Datadog or like Prometheus exporters or like anything else, basically you install the sensor, right? The
Hmm.
collector on your application clusters, but Groundcover doesn't have any access to that. The sensor itself knows how to write the data remotely through various methods into Incloud, which is already in your cloud premises. It can be, a private link or VPC peering type of approach between your application cluster and the Incloud cluster, and then Incloud can kind of connect to Groundcover to allow the UI to query the data. That's a
Hmm.
very interesting architecture in a sense that when data travels, it never leaves your cloud premises and it doesn't go through any control plane of Groundcover, right? It's basically just two components on your, say, AWS environment communicating with one another. And only when
Hmm.
you query the data, it goes through an authentication at live, allowing you to access the remote Incloud data sources. This is strong for various reasons, right? It means that we can audit whoever is kind of accessing the data, and
Hmm.
when someone isn't like actively accessing the data isn't anywhere else but your cloud premises. So from that perspective, security is also very easy to govern, right? It's not like
Yeah.
it's somewhere in Groundcover, and then you have to ask me like a million questions of how we protect it, store it
Yeah.
and encrypt it. It's encrypted and controlled on your security policies, and just when you create it live is transitioned to the Groundcover control plane. Another cool example is that, say I'm a security aware company and I'm already securing my cloud native deployments with, say, I don't know, a feature from Palo Alto, whatever, right?
Hmm.
I have an agent already covering my Kubernetes environments or my cloud environments.
Yeah.
You can actually run it on Incloud. You can basically
Hmm.
implement the same security policies your organization believes in on our Incloud because it's part of your stack, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
therefore, you can protect your Groundcover data in a sense, like you believe you should protect it, and therefore, we don't make decisions like that for you, right? So if you want to encrypt that address with a
Got it.
specific standard, you can do it on Incloud, which is
Hmm.
again very very different than what people used to think about observability data.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds very unique as well as very good. Like different companies might have their own compliance with respect to the data. They might have some security restrictions, policies. So you can take care of yours because ground cover allows you to have it in cloud on your on premises.
Exactly.
Perfect. And what are the new features that you're looking at from the ground cover point of view? In future, would you like to add one thing? I did not explore that part. Does ground cover also support beyond Kubernetes? Can I have it with my virtual machines or the monolith setup that I have?
So it's a great question, and it also ties exactly to the roadmap we're working on. Groundcover, we think of it as more than a Kubernetes monitoring solution. We
Exactly.
definitely support a bunch of integrations right now outside of Kubernetes, like native CloudWatch and Kinesis integrations, and basically integration with any open telemetry Prometheus source, as we mentioned, and so on. So you can definitely stream data from outside the cluster, but the
Hmm.
sensor right now is only deployed in the Kubernetes environment of
Okay.
whatever flavor. Now, eBPF is built to run on any Linux machine, right? It's not limited to
Exactly.
run on Kubernetes, and therefore it can clearly run on VMs, right? So Groundcover is moving right now as well to support EC2 type deployments,
Hmm.
basically allowing you to run us on individual VMs as well as Kubernetes. And then we're going to go, and this is something that's going to be released in the sort of next 2 months or so.
Okay.
And then the next pass is other deployment or orchestrations such as EC2 and these types of deployment that basically have a different orchestration
Hmm.
besides Kubernetes. So we're definitely heavily moving already to running the sensor wherever it can run on top of the integrations, because wherever we run the sensor, we have the capabilities to already do the correlations of data for you, right?
Hmm.
So it's easy to get, say, information from EC2 today using some log collector or Prometheus or OpenTelemetry. But once we actually run the sensor there, then we know how to, tie it all together for you.
Hmm.
Metrics, logs, traces, events from the infrastructure without you doing anything. And it's a much more powerful experience. So yeah, you can expect it already in the next 2 months or so
Next.
to already kind of not be Kubernetes pure, and then it's gonna move very quickly to that in more and more deployments.
A curious question, because we are talking about eBPF. Does it also work with the serverless infrastructure? If any organization, if they're on serverless, do your future roadmap also align with that, where they can use the ground cover with serverless?
So in serverless, you can't. There's like two gaps right now for eBPF. One is serverless type deployments where you don't have actually access to the kernel. It's not a
Yeah.
machine,
Yeah.
and therefore you can't run an eBPF. And deployments such as Fargate, which is basically not allowing you access to the underlying VM.
Hmm.
So in both, we cannot run the sensor today. And on Fargate, for example, the community is definitely working towards that, and this is
Yeah.
going to be solved. But in serverless, it's not going to be an easy win anytime soon. So when it comes to that, Groundcover will basically offer parity, right? So if you
Hmm.
have, say, a bunch of compute deployments, and on top of that, you have 20% in lambdas or some functions in your cloud, then we will be able to support parity like any other vendor would do, which is through some SDK integration like OpenTelemetry or some integration from the cloud metrics themselves on that
Hmm.
function performance, which we already do today. And in a sense, maybe we're not going to be better there, right? Because we cannot run
Yeah.
the sensor, but we're definitely not going to be any worse than any other vendor. So
Hmm.
we're going to just go in that path, and wherever we can run the sensor, make sure we offer the full parity of any integration that makes sense to bring in the data clearly into the same platform.
Agreed. And is it the case? Is it the same case with anyone running Kubernetes clusters with serverless architecture? Will it still be the same?
Yeah, so anything that basically is still on that premises will require, different types of integrations rather than running the sensor itself. But in most cases, people turning into Kubernetes, which is still, our bread and butter, will, be relevant to ground cover in that form and open other, and there will be some maybe smaller load of information that we just need to integrate. And if it's enough
Makes sense.
value in your compute environment, it might be worth the investment on your end to integrate a bunch more data from outside the compute deployments themselves.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think beyond just the eBPF information, you already have a lot of other information. You have the APM, you have information that you get from the cloud platform. So I think that
Mm-hmm.
itself can give a lot of insight.
Exactly.
Makes sense. And do you have any suggestions or recommendations for having a good, robust monitoring or observability setup? Like I know with Groundcover, you do a lot of things already, but if someone wants to onboard Groundcover, do they have any prerequisites apart from installing your sensor on their platform?
No, so one of the cool things is they don't have to do anything. They don't have to bring their own backend or anything like that. But they can if they want to. They can be aware. We have a lot of customers say migrating to Victoria Metrics regardless, or moving their open source stack into Groundcover because they want to be aware of what we're doing and how
Mhm.
we're operating. But you don't have to, and that's one of the fun things about it. Some customers just deploy Groundcover and don't even understand the in-cloud deployment. Not, some of them might have even missed the fact that data is staying on their
Okay.
premises, and that's perfectly fine, right? So no prerequisites. But if you do want to get down into that, you can see that in our documentation. Everything is transparently laid out, the entire architecture and how we operate. And if we've made you fall in love in any of these technologies, regardless of ground covering, eBPF, ClickHouse, Victoria Metrics, Vector, whatever we're using in the architecture, as you can
Hmm.
see, then it's also a win for us. We want to make sure that we help teams rather than just dropping the solution down their lap.
Perfect. One last question before I let you go is Incloud already gives you a lot of security for the people who have installed and using the ground cover. But one thing that attracted me in the docs is also the air gap solution. So, like, what does it offer beyond Incloud? Because Incloud itself looks very secure and it's very much on premises.
True. We believe that most organizations that are privacy aware should use it in cloud, right? It allows us two major advantages. One is that the UI itself is SaaS, and we know the advantages of that, right? We can update features and improve, and basically, provide value on the same sensor and the same backend, and you can wake up one day and see a new feature. And on the other hand, in cloud is still managed in the sense that our control plane has access to manage the infrastructure of in cloud, and therefore scale it up and down, back it up, make sure you get a SaaS experience on the in-cloud backend itself, even though it's running on your premises. Disaster recovery, backup, our SRE team waking up at night for you. If
Hmm.
something happens to the data reliability of in-cloud, you don't have to be concerned about it. For some organizations, right now, it's mostly financial institutes and
Hmm.
governmental agencies that work with Groundcover. That is not enough from specific policies they work under. And they want to make sure that everything is air gap completely. The UI is served from their environment, and the
Hmm.
authentication process as well isn't operated by some remote SSO. They want to make sure that everything works in their network. And Groundcover, since Incloud is already running on premises, that leap to full air gap is not, big for us. And therefore, we
Hmm.
support also full air gap, running the UI where you want us to, running the
Okay.
authentication method where you want us to. It comes with the disadvantages of not being able to help you out
Hmm.
when a component needs some kind of scale or fixture, because we cannot access the system, right? But or cannot our control plane cannot manage the system. But other than that, Groundcover knows how to be deployed in any air gap environment, and we work with a lot of teams in that way. And I think it's an
Hmm.
interesting approach, at least to serve that market segment, even though we want to push more people into InCloud.
Yeah, because there is that market section, probably people on the government cloud or people on the government
Yeah,
projects where they cannot even afford that 1%. So
true,
you also have an offering for them.
true.
Thank you so much, Shahar, for being on the podcast today. And I would highly recommend Groundcover. Whoever is watching this stream, definitely go back and try their free trial. Try their playground, which is very cool. You should definitely give your hands on that. And then you can take that back to your organizations if you like it.
Thank you so much for having me, Abhishek. It was great talking to you.